In 1914, quarry workers near Bonn, in Germany, uncovered a grave roughly 14,000 years old. Inside lay two people, a man and a woman, buried together with care, and tucked in beside them was a third body, the remains of a young dog. Much later, when researchers looked closely at that animal's bones and teeth, they found something that changes the whole feeling of the grave. The dog had been sick as a puppy, gravely sick, with a disease that should have killed it. It had survived, which in a world without medicine almost certainly means that human hands had nursed it, kept it warm, and fed it by mouth through weeks when it could do nothing for them in return. That is one of the oldest pieces of evidence we have for a bond that now feels eternal. The dog asleep at the foot of the bed. The animal that chose us, or that we chose, somewhere deep in the Ice Age. But here is a question that sounds like a children's daydream and turns out to open a door into something much deeper. What if that companion in the grave had not been a dog at all? What if our ancestors, surrounded by the most powerful predator of the northern world, had reached instead for the bear? It is a wonderful image. A hearth guarded not by a wolf's descendant, but by something that could break a bison's spine with one swing. And it is almost certainly impossible, for reasons that have nothing to do with how strong or clever a bear is, and everything to do with a hidden set of rules that quietly decides which animals can ever join us and which never can. So let us actually walk through those rules, piece by piece, because the reason the answer is no turns out to be far stranger and more revealing than a simple yes would have been. There is a checklist buried inside this question, a short list of traits an animal must have before it can be tamed across the generations rather than just gentled one at a time. The bear fails that list in a way that is almost poetic, and we will come back to exactly where. But to see why the bear fails, we first have to understand why the wolf, of all the dangerous animals on Earth, passed. Because the truth is that we did not really conquer the wolf. The wolf, in a sense, met us halfway. The leading idea, argued forcefully by the biologist Raymond Coppinger and others, is that dogs were not deliberately created by some clever Stone Age genius who caught wolf pups and bent them to his will. The process was quieter and stranger than that. When human camps began producing reliable piles of scraps and waste, the wolves that could tolerate being near people, the slightly bolder, slightly calmer ones, gained a free meal. The jumpiest, most aggressive wolves fled and gained nothing. Generation after generation, the animals that could stand human company out-ate and outbred the ones that could not. Tameness, in other words, was not forced onto the wolf. It was selected for by the wolves themselves as they crept closer to our fires. Domestication began as a partnership, neither side fully intended. Exactly when and where this happened is still genuinely unsettled, and honest researchers disagree. The genetic evidence points to dogs descending not from any wolf alive today, but from a now extinct population of Ice Age wolves, with estimates for the split ranging across a wide window somewhere in the span of roughly 15 to 40,000 years ago, and possibly happening more than once. The details remain a moving target, but the shape of the story holds steady across all the versions. It was gradual, it was driven from both sides, and it started not with a leash but with leftovers. But none of that could have worked without the one thing that made the wolf special, and it is not strength or speed, or even intelligence. It is the pack. A wolf is a deeply social animal, built from the inside out to live in a cooperative group with a clear structure. It reads the moods of others. It defers to leaders. It coordinates a hunt, shares a kill, and tolerates the young and the weak feeding alongside it. A wolf's mind already contains the machinery for living inside a hierarchy and answering to someone above it. When that animal slid into a human group, it did not have to learn an entirely new way of being. It simply slotted a human into a role its brain was already shaped to recognize. The dog could read us because the wolf already read other wolves. We did not teach the dog to belong to a family. We borrowed a talent the wolf already had. And that borrowed talent was not a small thing. It turned the dog into a working partner in a way no solitary animal ever could be. A dog could join the hunt and actually cooperate, driving game toward its human companions rather than simply taking the prize for itself. It could stand guard at night and raise the alarm because warning the group is what a pack animal does by instinct. It could share space, share food, and tolerate children and elders moving around it. Every one of those behaviors flows from the same source: the deep social wiring of an animal that evolved to live and work inside a group. A bear shares none of it. A bear does not coordinate, does not warn, does not willingly surrender a meal, and feels no pull to protect anyone outside its own skin. Even a perfectly calm bear would not have been a hunting partner or a guardian. It would have been a very large, very strong animal that happened, for now, to be standing near you. Now hold a bear up against that picture, and the whole fantasy quietly falls apart. A bear, for almost all of its life, is alone. With a handful of exceptions, bears are solitary animals. A mother raises her cubs and then sends them off. And after that, they live and hunt and feed by themselves, coming together only where food is so abundant that tolerating a neighbor briefly is worth it. There is no pack. There is no hierarchy to slot into, no instinct to defer to a leader, no built-in habit of reading and answering to a group. The very thing that made the wolf able to join us, that ancient social wiring, is the thing the bear was never issued. You cannot become a junior member of a family if your entire mind is built around needing no family at all. And the solitary nature is only the first failure on the checklist. The geographer Jared Diamond laid out, in his work on why so few animals were ever domesticated, a whole series of hurdles a species has to clear, and he argued that to be domesticable, an animal must pass every single one. Fail any test and the project collapses. Bears fail several at once. They grow slowly and take years to mature, so each animal is an enormous, dangerous investment that pays back late, if at all. They breed slowly, a few cubs every couple of years, which makes the kind of rapid selective breeding domestication needs almost impossible. They are huge, and they are strong enough that a single bad moment is lethal, and their temperament is famously unpredictable. The disposition of an animal that has no evolutionary reason to care what a human wants. The wolf passed nearly the whole list almost by accident. The bear stumbles on most of it. There are smaller absurdities too, once you start picturing the daily reality. Many bears hibernate, which means a companion animal that simply switches off and vanishes into a den for months of every year, useless precisely through the hardest part of winter when an Ice Age group needed help most. And a bear is enormous and omnivorous, with an appetite to match its size, so feeding one would have meant a constant, heavy drain on the very food the humans needed to survive. A dog could live on the scraps we threw away. A bear would have eaten us out of the cave. If you want to feel just how hard taming truly is, look at what it took to do it on purpose, under modern conditions, with a far more promising animal than a bear. Beginning in the late 1950s, the Soviet geneticist Dmitry Belyaev set out to recreate domestication from scratch using silver foxes. His method was brutally simple. In each generation, he allowed only the calmest, least fearful foxes, the ones that did not panic or snap at a human hand, to breed. Nothing else was selected for, just tameness. The results, continued for decades by his colleague Lyudmila Trut, were astonishing. Within a surprisingly small number of generations, the foxes began to change, not just in behavior, but in body. They wagged their tails, their ears went floppy, their coats broke into patches of white. They began to seek out human affection like dogs. Selecting for nothing but a calm temperament had dragged a whole suite of dog-like traits along with it, a phenomenon researchers call domestication syndrome. And here is the point that matters for our bear. Even with foxes, animals already small and quick to breed and far more tractable than any bear, the process took decades of relentless, deliberate selection. Now imagine attempting the same thing with an animal that breeds once every 2 or 3 years, takes years to grow up, weighs as much as several men, and could end the experiment and the experimenter in a single swipe. The math does not merely get harder. It stops working. It is worth playing the fantasy out fairly, though, because that is the whole point of a question like this. Suppose, against all odds and all good sense, that some impossibly patient line of humans had spent 10,000 years selecting the very tamest bears in every generation, the way Belyaev selected his foxes. What would they end up with? If domestication syndrome held, the bear might shrink somewhat. Its coat might break into patches. Its temperament might soften at the edges. But the deepest trait, The solitude sits far below the reach of that kind of breeding. You could perhaps blunt a bear's aggression. You could not give it a pack instinct it never had because there is nothing there to amplify. The likeliest end product of that absurd experiment is not a loyal hearth bear at all. It is a slightly calmer, solitary animal that still does not particularly want you around, still will not share, and still cannot be trusted with the group. Even in the best case the daydream allows, the bear refuses to become the thing the daydream wants it to be. So could a bear ever be tamed at all? As an individual, strangely, yes, and that is where people get fooled. History is full of tamed bears. Cubs raised by hand, bears trained to perform, bears kept for spectacle for centuries. A bear taken young and raised by people can certainly become accustomed to them. But this is taming, not domestication, and the difference is everything. Taming is what you do to one animal in one lifetime. Domestication is what happens to an entire species across thousands of years, until the gentleness is written into the genes and a creature is born already leaning toward us. A tamed bear is still, in every cell, a wild bear wearing a thin coat of habit. It has not been changed at its root. And the records of those tamed bears carry a grim and consistent footnote, because again and again the calm animal that had lived peacefully among people for years would, without warning, revert to exactly what it had always been. The hearth guardian of the daydream is, underneath, a loaded weapon that nobody ever fully unloaded, which is the reframe this whole question has been circling toward. The popular story tells us that early humans surveyed the animal kingdom and shrewdly chose the wolf as the best raw material for a companion. But that is not what happened, and it is not how domestication works at all. We did not pick the wolf for being the strongest or the most useful predator available. If usefulness and power were the test, the bear would have won easily. The wolf won for a reason that has nothing to do with might. It won because its social, cooperative, family-minded brain happened to overlap with ours, two pack-hunting species whose ways of living could lock together like two halves of the same shape. The dog is not a trophy of human dominance. It is the living record of a rare meeting between two minds built along the same lines. And the bear, for all its magnificence, was simply built along a different line. Its solitude, the very independence that makes it so formidable, is also a locked door. There is no slot in a bear's mind where a human partner could ever fit. Not because the bear is lesser, but because it was never an animal that needed anyone at all. So picture, one last time, that grave near Bonn. The two people, and the young dog they fed through a sickness it could not have survived alone. The animal that gave them nothing in those weeks but received their care anyway. That moment, that quiet, mutual loyalty between a human and a creature that was not human, was only ever possible because the animal in the grave came from a long line of pack hunters who already understood what it meant to look after one another. A bear could have been stronger. A bear could have been more terrifying at the mouth of the cave. But a bear could never have been laid in that grave, because a bear could never have been nursed through that illness in the first place, and would never, in 14,000 years, have stayed to be buried beside the people who tried. The companion we ended up with was never the most powerful animal in the forest. It was the one whose heart, like ours, was built to stay.